And now for something completely different.
Humans do have an amazing capacity for believing what they choose. I think before we go around killing people, we had better make sure of our evidence.
They lied to you. It's time to learn the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
From what was once an inarticulate mass of lifeless tissues, may I now present a cultured, sophisticated man about town.
I think we're ready, man.
Think we should start talking now, Tom?
We probably should. It's about time.
I like it. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
Hey, everybody. This is the Annoying Peasant Radio Show, and we are very happy that you joined us. My name is Brad, and this is my good buddy, Tom.
Hello.
And we're really professional radio guys.
We're ready to rock.
Yeah.
Okay, this is that dumb silence in the show where like, what do we talk about?
What? You're cutting in and out for me, Tom. I'm sorry.
Uh-oh. That's not good. That's got to be a Skype thing.
Could be.
Is it getting any better or is it getting worse?
I'm about the same. But we'll make it through. We can do this.
Okay, if we have to break the connection and restart, I guess we could do that, but we'll hang on for as long as we can.
Yeah, we may need to do that because it might be getting a little worse.
Okay. I just wanted to start the show with chatting about some current event stuff. If you have anything on your mind, is there something that you saw this last week that interests you?
If you can hear me, I think I heard you ask me about current event stuff. And
yes.
I was going to talk about that there is legislation or there's enough votes or something that California might turn into 6 states or 12 states or more than one state.
I heard 6.
Okay, 6.
That's what I heard. And I like that idea.
I thought you might.
Yeah, and I just say it's a step in the right direction. I'd like to see them go into splinter into more and make every individual their own state. So just keep on it going.
I pitched you underhand on that one.
Yes, you did. That was very nice of you. I appreciate that.
So we could start our own state up here in Wisconsin.
Yes, we'll call it Northern Wisconsin. I'm pretty creative, don't you think?
I think you're a genius.
Yeah, well, I don't know what's all behind this. I don't know if you want to call it. It's really not a secession movement. It's just the breakup of the state of California. I don't particularly know, other than I've heard stuff over the years. Some people saying that, it's we don't want all our tax dollars to go down to Southern California, vice versa. The urban areas don't want to get it out to the rural areas. The same argument everywhere, I guess, is the case. Nothing new there. But obviously it makes big headlines because California is such a large state.
Absolutely. And I think it's pretty interesting news.
Yeah.
I don't know that I have a political position to state. I just think it's very interesting news. This is in the wake of Texas saying, "Hey, screw you other 49 states. We're going to go on our own." Certainly have discussions of that. And I'm not sure that it's all for the right motive as you would have wanted to be, but it does it is a step in the direction of smaller groups exercising their voice at a minimum.
What was the T-shirt? No, I don't. It was a quote from George Carlin that I saw this week. Most of our listeners are probably well aware of the quote. He said, I think he said on his quote, "I have just as much authority as the Pope. I just don't have as many people who believe it." And, of course, I would like to twist that around and say, essentially, we all have the same authority as the president. We just, again, don't have enough people to believe it.
And for you, it would be back to the principles of liberty, that you've got authority over yourself.
Absolutely. They claim, or I've read, the only legitimate authority that the government could have, or the state could have, is one that you gave it. In other words, if you never gave an authority to surrender some of your income, then the state wouldn't have the authority to have it. I can't say take it because it wouldn't be taking anymore if you gave them that authority. That would be the only case. Oh, am I doing okay on sound?
I think so, mostly.
Okay. So again, if you grant, one of the limiting factors of that is that the state can't come up or create authorities that didn't already exist, right? If only the people could grant the authority they already have to the state couldn't make any authority beyond that, which, of course, they can do that right now. It's no big deal. They just use the power of the pen to write a new law and say, hey, now we have the authority to do this. So it does certainly put a limit in some respects what the state would be, what it would have authority over. By the way, we're just going to do the news here for a little bit, and then we're going to get kind of to our feature story, which is the migrant surge on the border. And then I have I don't know if we're going to do it as our closing song. I have John Alder's music. I got it uploaded into the broadcast center today.
Okay.
So we can play that. I don't know if we want to do that as our outro, or we just want to take a little breather during the show and play that. It's very Johnny Cash.
I like it.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. So,
all right. Let's make our listeners. Let's hang them out a little bit and make them wonder, like keep on the edge of their seat.
There you go.
Isn't that just petty and stupid of me?
Okay, so let's continue with the news.
Let's do it.
Have you seen any of this with Elizabeth Warren? That she's kind of on this, I don't know, speaking tour. It's just amazing. I read one of the stories about her, and of course, the question that comes from the audience is, will you please run for president?
Mm-hmm.
And I just had to giggle when I read the story, all that, and then I get to the comments, and the very first comment is, "She's like a breath of fresh air." And I'm always like, wait a minute, that's really stale, because every time somebody wants somebody to run, they're like a breath of fresh air. They always say that, and it just drives me nuts. It's like, oh, goodness. But I got to tell you, this week I spent a fair amount of time in chat rooms on Blog Talk Radio.
Okay.
Mostly on what I guess call conservative shows. Most of these shows had 6 or maybe 8 people in the chat room.
Mm-hmm.
And as you might imagine, I was the only dissenter in the chat room. And there was this one guy whose handle was like Fly Catch or something was his name. Anyway, they were talking about this migration surge or the immigration thing, however you want to describe it, the emergency, I guess, we have on the border. So says our president anyway. And as the discussion went on, it's just constantly about, well, we got to secure our border. We got to keep these people out. They're wanting to use basically our resources. They're sucking our wealth. They're going to take over our country from within. and maybe they discuss a little the political angle, like, well, geez, if all these Central Americans, Mexicans are come into the country, they're going to change the electorate,
Change the balance.
or right, and they'll be against us. Is again how the chat went. So we got to stop this, and the way to stop this is to secure the border. And, of course, the Democrats don't want to do that because the balance of the electorate is supposedly moving in their favor, so they don't want to close it off. And, of course, I had to ask right away, wait a minute, if the Republicans really do want to close off the border, didn't we have some Republican presidents here in semi-recent history a few times? How come they didn't close off the border? Right? This is what these conservative guys were saying, that the border has to be closed. And we got this Obama guy in there now, and he won't do it because it's to his advantage. I'm like, well, then why didn't Bush, and Reagan do it?
Well, and further, and this isn't the direction you're going, I'm sorry, but if it were, yes, it's benefiting them, but what if it was, that particular influx was then for the Republicans? They'd be just as enthusiastic. On the conservative side, they'd be going, well, they'd be rethinking that. Well, wait a minute, we got a chance to get an advantage here.
Absolutely, it's a political arena. So politicians will try to play it to their advantage, whichever way that is. It doesn't really matter to them, just as long as it's to their advantage.
Right.
So I had to chime in and say, well, wouldn't we want to ask the question of why? And I guess we're kind of getting into the real meat of the show here. This is what I want to talk about tonight.
It's okay. Anyway. It's a very interesting topic.
But I'm trying to do it at the moment more from the angle of how the discussion went in the chats. But so I asked, well, shouldn't we ask ourselves why these people may be coming to the border? I mean, I guess it's not to them. My point is, to them, it was not relevant. And when I asked that question, I said, hey, it's like we have a giant carrot out, and these people see the carrot, and they're coming for the carrot. And I went through and said, well, the carrot basically is the welfare state, right? And this I didn't say, but put yourself in their shoes. Let's say you just make it simple and say, well, you're from a poverty-stricken country. You're very poor, right? Your motivation is, of course, one, you got nothing to lose because you don't have anything. Mm-hmm. Two is you're hearing stories that if you get to the U.S. border, you were looking at free food. If you have a kid across the border, he's an instant citizen. You can't be deported, blah, blah, blah. All the benefits, right? The birth will likely happen in a hospital for free, right? And if you, I guess, learn the system quickly enough, you can get on welfare. You can get all kinds of assistance. So I don't understand. Why would you not come, right? If you're facing starvation, or you have the possibility of a better life for yourself and or your family, why would you not come? Right? And the only answer I can come up is what these guys would say, these conservatives say, well, because it's illegal. And, the question is, really, you wouldn't break even a law? And I assume some of them don't even know it's illegal. They're just coming here. But let's just say for the moment, they do know it's illegal. Seriously, you're starving to death, but you say, I think I could survive or have a better life. I might not starve to death, but it's illegal, so I won't do that. You really think people go through that process?
Like that's going to get in the way?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have this part of the conversation with them, but I just laid out, hey, there's a carrot out there. Isn't that why they're coming? I mean, who's the fool here? It's a little bit, like I've gone through the analogy of I leave my wallet sitting in the street with a bunch of cash half hanging out, and then I say, Brad, my money got stolen. Well, first of all, there's really a question of whether it was actually stolen, because is it abandoned if it's laying in the road? We're getting back to the right of first appropriation, which we talked about, the reverse of it, I guess, abandonment. It's actually kind of an interesting thought, but you probably would just say, hey, well, where'd you leave it? And well, in the middle of the street, completely unattended. I was at home sleeping. And I got a feeling you'd fairly quickly say, hey, ding-a-ling, if you don't want your money stolen, don't leave it laying. Don't create a carrot for somebody to take it. Right? I think on a personal level, most people get to that point very quickly. But when it comes to the state, it was so funny. The guy's answer when I said, hey, we ought to look at, I kind of established the carrot thing. And then I said, well, the way to do it then would be to eliminate the carrot, which is the welfare state. And this is from a conservative chat. Now, this fella, I didn't know. I didn't interview him. I didn't establish, in fact, that he was conservative. I believe he was by his other commentaries. But he said his comment to me was, seriously? With a question mark? And I said, yeah. Well, I don't know. Why would you not be serious about that? So I get on the next show. This one was ending. So I hop to another one, and I'm there. And lo and behold, Flycatch shows up in the chat room.
Your buddy.
Yeah. And the first thing, I'm in the chat room for 5 minutes before he gets there. He gets in the chat room. The first thing he says to I assume he knew some of the people in the chat room, and I can't remember their handles, but he says, hey, so-and-so, annoying peasant wants to, end the world. And he was like, he's into, Red Dawn. I was like, it just struck me how it's not a discussion. And I eventually just left the show. I didn't say all that much, or I didn't chat that much, because it's amazing how closed off the discussion is. They were very interested in saying the same crap that you've probably heard a million times. I know I've heard a billion times. But there's no underlying, well, why is this? Or how does it get to be that way? Or what are the incentives for that? Or what are the disincentives for that? There's just nothing. It's just, in this case, it was more, we got to have, a belief in God. You got to be God-fearing. And we got to, have low taxes, and we got to secure the border. But
so, is it not possible that this gentleman, or I'm going to back up a couple things. One, is it not possible that these immigrants from Mexico or wherever not only view this as a welfare state, or in your words, but also don't see this country as a better opportunity? Or are they the same?
I'm sure there's an element to it of, hey, I could get a job there and I could make a decent living.
And I could better myself.
Absolutely. I don't know what the calculus is, but here's the deal. Let's just for a second assume there's no welfare state. There's no freebie. The only way you come here, the only way you survive is if you have a job, right? Or you get a gift from somebody, or of course you win the lottery. Right? It's basically one of those. Or you go to Atlantic City and you gamble and you win $1 billion, right? What is it? It's either gambling, you earn it, you gift. I'm trying to think of all the ways that you can come to money legitimately, right?
Okay.
Well, what's the harm in essentially everybody coming then? Because if they can't find a job, they got to turn around and go home. In other words, if there's jobs available, they take them. Well, that makes the U.S. economy stronger. If there's no jobs available, they don't find a job, they can turn around and go home. Right? So if there's no welfare state, there's really no problem with their coming. Now, not in this aspect. There's more to it in the article we're going to discuss from Hans Hermann Hoppe in a little bit, of what a free society would look like and what forced integration and free immigration would be. But that's kind of the next subject here. But if you think about what's the big deal? If there's no welfare state, sure, give it a shot. And I know usually it's labor that speaks up and says, well, wait a minute, the cost of labor will go down because the supply of labor is higher and wages will fall. Well, I got a little news flash for you. You're already competing with the rest of the world for labor. I mean, I think some manufacturing jobs have been exported to China, actually. I think it actually happened.
Well, first they went to Mexico, then they went to China.
Yeah, and other points, Bangladesh, etc., right?
Indonesia.
Anywhere where there's cheap labor, that's where a lot of those jobs went. Of course, not all of them, but the ones that were probably the most easily transferable, they were transferred. So you are, in fact, already competing with, labor in China, labor in India, Bangladesh, whatever, right? All these places, you are already competing with them. Yeah. So it's not that, well, we don't want to compete with them. Well, I get you don't want to, but you already are. It's a fact of life.
Okay, I want to make another point for the conservatives.
Sure.
This guy calling you names, Tom. He called you names. He said you're in favor of Red Dawn, abolishing the government.
Yeah, in a violent way.
In a violent way,
right? Wasn't the movie that was a violent deal, right? Actually, wasn't it like the Russians came over and they were attempting to take over the country?
In Red Dawn, it was actually on a couple nights ago, and I watched about 5 minutes of it. And yes, the Russians invaded us, is the point of that movie. But the thing that we fight so much with liberty and trying to get your message to people and liberty across to people is that it's very, very, very scary to a lot of people to think that we might, if your desires were to come true, that there would be no government entity.
Yes.
And therefore there would be, I think a lot of people conjure up chaos, everything from chaos to Red Dawn. And that's not really what you are advocating. And yes, you're advocating that we don't need the state to do all these things for us. We don't need the state. But it could be a very, very peaceful place. Maybe even more peaceful.
It'd definitely be more peaceful because I believe the state is a coercive agency. If you eliminate the coercive agency, there's less coercion. Right? That's the whole point. So you're bringing me to another article, the one I just sent you before the show, which I know is cheating, but I want to. It's an article written on July 11th by Sheldon Richmond. It's entitled TGIF, which stands for, by the way, the goal is freedom. Speaking to non-libertarians. And he basically says, hey, if you're speaking to non-libertarians, you have to, basically think about government the way non-libertarians think about government. And I'm, of course, summarizing. But he says, they see this, the national government as providers of a social safety net, guarantors of products and services, right, through regulation. They guarantee, meat's going to be fit for human consumption, etc.
Right.
They improve the quality of the meat because of the regulation and the quality of everything. They see it as protectors of workers, defenders of the national borders, which we were already kind of chewing on, and dispensers of benefits to an assortment of deserving groups. And he says farmers, exporters, too big to fail banks, low-income people, and so on. And this is all represented as indispensable to the general welfare. So this is where I see these so-called conservative Republicans coming from the exact same location as, I shouldn't say exact position, but very close to what most people call a liberal Democrat. And I know the people on both sides of the aisle are just having a little heart palpitation right now when he's saying that. But think about it. Yeah, the conservative Republicans might be more for saying, hey, we have to bail out these big banks. We can't allow the banks to fail. The liberal Democrats are saying, no, we have to bail out the poor people, the people who have been disadvantaged, and they'll say, as from no fault of their own, because a big company just decided to fold up tent and move its production over to China. It's not their fault, so they're deserved to be bailed out. And so the point is, he's setting this up. That's how people see the government, who are non-libertarians, of course. And if you say, hey, the government is a coercive agency, it should get eliminated, anyone who is for these services is going to say, oh, sure, just eliminate the services I think are quite necessary, so I don't like this idea. Bad idea. And he goes on to say, well, that's not the way, essentially, to address non-libertarians. And this is, I'm getting back to where you were saying, well, like a social safety net. Well, how could you have that if you didn't have the state? So when people say, well, okay, you eliminate the state, you eliminate the social safety net. If I'm on on the social safety net, you say, well, so I'm screwed. So the way you have to address these people is saying two things. Well, a number of things. One is, well, just because I believe the state should be eliminated doesn't mean the service that you're receiving should also be eliminated. I'm just saying it shouldn't be supplied by the state. And then the next step is, well, they don't see how that could happen, right?
Right.
So you have to first say, hey, maybe the service that you're receiving is legitimate. It's just not the right agency, the right way to get it. When I say right way, it's not a good way, and it's, of course, a violation of the non-aggression principle and personal property right or private property rights. But he says the libertarian job is to convince people that on two counts, government provision is a bad way to secure a good end. First, it is morally wrong because it requires compulsion, the threat of physical violence, starting with taxation, compulsion, or coercion. And second, as a consequence of the first feature, state provision is inferior to private provision because it is outside the free and competitive market, a process that, unlike the political realm, ties rewards to customers and stimulates the entrepreneurial discovery, which makes products and services better and cheaper. Okay, so if you say you're against public education, 9 times out of 10 or more, somebody's going to say, oh, so you want people to be stupid and uneducated. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm against public education. Not education, public education. Right?
Can you not further define that as tax-funded education?
Yeah, through compulsion. Right? We're saying, again, when he says, government provision is a bad way to secure a good end. So I'm not saying education is bad. That's a good thing. It's a bad way in which it's delivered through compulsion, right? And not only, think about it, public education for a second. Of course, you're paying property tax by compulsion. It's money extorted from you is how I would argue it. But even the student on the other end is under compulsion to attend. He can't even opt out to say, well, I see Brad's paying for this classroom, but I don't even want to go. No, you must attend, and Brad must pay. That's the craziest notion I've ever heard. If you applied that to apples, people would say, well, of course, why should Brad pay for apples that the guy doesn't even want?
But the government could also say, hey, Brad, you've got to eat apples. You've got to eat 2 apples a day. You've got to eat 6 apples a week.
Yeah, they do it now. So I just thought this was interesting. This article goes on from Sheldon Richman. He talks about how employees can gain protections in the workplace in as Hoppe would call it, a private law society. He talks about organizations like Underwriters Laboratories, Consumer Reports, and Angie's List, right? And he talks about that they actually provide real counsel, essentially, And when the government provides an illusion of protection, earlier we just spoke about, fresh meat in the marketplace, and everything's, well, we got to have the meat inspectors, otherwise, bad meat would hit the market. And the first thing I think of, really? So you're telling me since we have meat inspectors, no bad meat has hit the market?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many times do you hear of hundreds of thousands of pounds, even millions of pounds of meat being recalled? Well, wasn't that stuff inspected?
Right.
I thought the inspection process was supposed to eliminate that. My point is, you're paying for the protection from the state, but you're not getting it. If it was done by the free market, whoever theoretically did that inspection and failed, they'd be fired on the spot. Right?
And we have our own free market up here in the woods, in the country. It's if you want to go down to your local farmer that raises a cow, you go get it right from him, right?
Yes, and why do you go there in the first place? Because you heard from your neighbor,
yes.
Hey, that guy has good meat over there, and you should see how he butchers his cattle and how he cares for them ahead of time. He doesn't feed them any crap.
Right.
Well, that's the best information you could possibly get from someone who's actually experienced it.
And conversely, just like Angie's List or these others that you mentioned, if Farmer Frank was, a bad farmer raising bad products and selling bad meat to people, I wonder how popular he would be. I think word in these parts travels faster than I think the internet would get around pretty darn fast.
Absolutely. It's amazing how reputation, how valuable it is, and how forceful social pressure is. Of course, many libertarians would argue social pressure is what holds the state together, but again, that's another topic, but interesting one nonetheless. And I just wanted to, touch on this article because of the experience I had in the last week in these chat rooms, how I was treated. And, one thing that I try to keep in mind always, Brad, is something that you accentuate frequently, and that is respectful conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to, hey, I didn't go, hey, I want a Red Dawn. I want to create a violent overthrow. Of course, if I did have the opportunity to say something, I'd be saying the exact opposite. And in fact, I did chat it in the first room, and the guy didn't see it because he left the chat room before I did, where I said, no, the real revolution comes from the education of the human mind.
So you didn't threaten the guy?
No, but
with guns or violence?
No, but part of me really wanted to. But that's also for my psychologist.
You just one?
Yeah, my team is psychologists. Sorry, I didn't. This thing's not working, is it? Nobody can hear me.
No, this is just us talking.
Okay, sweet.
Okay, so yes, respectful dialogue is how I believe you progress. It's how I've learned countless things in my life. And why can't your buddy on Blog Talk have a respectful dialogue with you? And I would advocate, because what you have to say and what our listeners hear from you from time to time is very scary stuff to them, because we're all junkies. We have no reference point of getting roads and services and having our meat inspected and who knows what, keeping people from selling drugs. There, I pitched Underhand again. Other than the government, because they're the only ones that could possibly do this. And it took me a long time to make that hurdle as well. That, wait a minute, how would that happen? Well, we could organize without the government. We can be individuals and organize without the government.
Yeah, and you do that all the time. Every time you buy a good or service, and I know there's government interference in almost anything nowadays, so some people no, we don't, because the government is involved in everything. Well, certainly there's a whole lot of truth in that. But anytime you call me and say, hey, Tom, do you have an extra pair of tennis shoes? I say, yeah. You go, hey, you want to, are they, you looking to sell them? Yeah. I'll give you $4 for it. Okay, done deal. There's no government involvement in that one. And we could just swing a deal or not swing a deal.
And the government is also preventing me from going down to my local farmer and buying his raw milk.
Absolutely. You can't do that.
Right. And I love it, and I know that people do it. I haven't done it myself yet, but I'm considering it.
One of the many ways around that is, since you can't buy it in a lot of states, what you do is actually become partial owner of the cow.
Yep.
So then you're not buying the milk. It's already your milk because you own the cow. Anyway, that's a little off
Right.
out of the wheelhouse tonight.
Yeah, we're kind of rambling a little bit, but a lot of these I think are very valid points. And your point to the exchange, the lack of dialogue, but the exchange you had, I think is a very common reaction to a lot of people.
Yes.
I personally thought you were off your rocker before we started to talk.
I am off my rocker.
Well, we know that. But this is not a subject, and we'll say it, we've said it a billion times, this is not a subject that you can just listen to in 5 minutes and go, oh, that makes perfect sense. Okay, they're right.
Yeah, but the thought of, okay, so I'm a non-libertarian, and you're a libertarian. You tell me that, I think we should do private roads, and I say, whatever. I say, explain to me how it could be done. I can just neglect or reject your explanation and say, see, it can't be done.
Right.
But that doesn't. The point is, people are just in this chat room, getting back to this discussion we had, they're just defending their own position. They don't want to really contemplate anything new. They are not in a position, they don't want to learn anything. And of course, I made that decision and said, hey, I get it. They don't really care to understand anything more. So I ultimately left the chat room. Because I only have so much time and energy, and I'm not going to spend it on people that don't want to have a real discussion. They just want to have a rah-rah session of their, same old crap with no reasoning. And obviously, I think, together we maybe can create that context. We can provide that reasoning that if someone is willing to stick with us for a few minutes, they go, okay, wait, I don't agree with some of this stuff. I don't agree with that position or whatever. But there is some underlying point there that's interesting. And my argument is always, and I brought this up before, some guys, a lot of people say to me, okay, I agree with you on this. I agree with you on the public education. I agree with you, it's a smorgasbord. You pick and choose which ones you agree with and the other ones you disagree with. Well, the whole point to where these positions have fallen out is because of the principles, which are the non-aggression principle and the security of private property rights, right? So what you're saying is, if you don't like those positions, you say, well, principles don't matter. I'm fine to have a completely unprincipled position as long as it's my way. Right? Well, I can't do that.
A lot of people are guilty as charged with that.
Yeah, most people are. I think very few. You can't not be a anarcho-capitalist and anarchist, so all the contemporary descriptions. You can't support the state that uses coercion to exist and say I have a coherent position. I can't support the state and be coherent. The only people who could possibly be coherent are people who support freedom. There's no other coherent philosophy. And so to say principles don't matter, it's outcomes that matter. It's like saying I'm a bank robber. Principles don't matter, it's outcomes. I get richer robbing banks. So I guess I just support robbing banks. It's a crazy notion. I don't understand how principles don't matter, but I've been told that many times. And it just kind of flips me out. Anyway, this week got me frustrated over this whole deal because of how I feel like I'm very respectful. I ask questions. I don't go in the chat room and say, you guys are stupid. You don't know what you're talking about. You have an inconsistent position. I don't go through any of that. I just ask a question. And, you're outcast because of that. And I would argue that's the ultimate in discrimination, and I don't like to use that word because it's not properly used. But it's not of this. I don't think it's of the skin color. It's of your ethnicity. It's not of. It's of the mind is where the ultimate discrimination is rooted, I should say. Anyway, try being an anarcho-capitalist in a whole group of either conservatives or liberal Democrats. Try it once. If you got a death wish, you'll do it.
I think we do about every show, don't we, Tom?
Absolutely. Trigger sent me a really good, parody. It was a cow, a bull, in an arena, and there was a, what do you call it, where the players come in to the arena? Oh, it's like the runway, that's not the jetway, what do you call it? Where you go back into the locker room.
Sure, okay.
And there was a sign with a divider in the middle. It showed left on one side and right on the other, and the sign further back said slaughterhouse. The point is, it doesn't matter if you take the left or the right, you're going to the slaughterhouse. Right? People don't get that there's no difference. And I know that, almost all of political discourse is dedicated to the so-called differences between the left and the right. And yes, there are differences, but in principle, there are no differences. They still support theft. They support aggressive action, and they do not support private property rights. That's the point. Who cares? Oh no, we steal from only richer people. Well, what's the difference? You support theft. That's the part I just, and they say, well, I know the argument is, well, it creates a better outcomes because if you steal money from rich people and give it to poor people, society gets better. Well, it can't possibly be true, but that's another story again. Anyway, so I was frustrated over this whole thing and how I think not only myself, I know how libertarians or anarcho-capitalists are treated in the whole of society. You're outcast. You're nuts. You don't understand anything. I've been told that 1,000 times. I'm sure a lot of people have been told that a lot more than I have. So that's what got me into the part of this, how to talk to non-libertarians by Sheldon Richman. Again, TGIF was speaking to non-libertarians was the article. I'll put it up on the Facebook page here.
Okay. By the way, you can find us on Facebook at Annoying Peasant Radio. Give us a search there, and you can keep up with the articles and so forth that we talk about most often, and some other stuff.
Okay, so let's kind of get to I'm going to be Bill O'Reilly. Now to our impact segment. Hey, did you see this one that Bill Bennett, he was the first drug czar. He did this whole thing on how the root cause of this, the migrant surge here that that Obama's addressing on the border. He just requested an emergency $3.4 billion to combat this emergency that we have on the border. And he went on to say that he thinks that the underlying cause is U.S. drug policy.
Really?
Yeah, I just read that. It's really amazing. So anyway,
so does that make him unique, Tom?
No, that makes me a fibber. See, because that actually wasn't Bill Bennett. It was the Honduran president Juan Hernandez. But this was a story from Reuters. I just wanted to test people to see how they receive things. If it comes from a Bill Bennett, the conservative Republicans typically go, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. That guy's smart. That makes sense. But if it comes from a Honduran president, Juan Hernandez, and wait a minute, I know people are thinking, you want to side with the president of Honduras. He's, a socialist, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's the problem. Just as you said about the separation of California, that, hey, they might be doing it for the wrong reasons. You'd like them to do it for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure the Honduran president is there. And according to this article from Mexico City on July 14th from Reuters, I can prove it, that he's messed up. But that's nothing new. The point is, if he says something right, it's right. It doesn't matter, that he's a socialist or not. again, if you support the non-aggression principle and property rights by accident, okay, you still support the right things. And on the next topic, you might be wrong, and I'll go, hey, wait a minute, I have to differ with you there. But it doesn't make you wrong in the first thing you did by accident. So this is interesting. He blamed U.S. drug policy. Again, this is Honduran President Juan Hernandez. He blamed U.S. drug policy for sparking violence in Central American countries. Just follow this. This is kind of interesting. And driving a surge of migration to the United States, according to an interview published on Monday. Hernandez, who took office in January after winning on a pledge to be tough on crime, said only a drop in violence would curb the wave of families and unaccompanied minors fleeing Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, who have overwhelmed temporary detention facilities in the U.S. border. Honduras has been living in an emergency for a decade, Hernandez told Mexican daily newspaper Excelsior. The root cause is that the United States and Colombia carried out big operations in the fight against drugs. Then Mexico did. Those operations pushed drug traffickers into Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, he suggested, adding, this is creating a serious problem for us that sparked this migration. Hernandez said more resources were needed in Central America to fight, here's the contradiction part we're getting to, were needed in Central America to fight drug gangs, and he said his country was deserving of U.S. aid, similar to the programs that funded anti-drug operations in Colombia and Mexico. So here he is at the trough, wanting some more cash from the U.S. That's a shocker.
Big news.
Yeah,
Big surprise.
Which proof is my good enough for me for proof that, yeah, he's just another socialist. He just wants money for free. But that doesn't make him wrong about why this is happening. I read a separate article that I cannot cite at the moment. It was really an article speaking to a mother and a young family. And it was young males, if I remember right. She had some young sons. And they were saying, hey, they left for the United States. They got interviewed at the border, because, why did you come here was the questions, all this stuff. And he said, hey, the deal was I was in a gang-infested area. And the deal, if I didn't join the gang, they were going to kill me. So my only other option that I could figure out is I had to get out of there. Okay, and then the question comes back to, well, then why is, these, okay, so why don't we just go over there and eliminate the gangs? Well, that's great, but I don't think you're going to eliminate the gangs as long as you have the demand in the United States and around the world for these drugs. In other words, you're going to say, don't supply the market with what it wants. Well, that doesn't work. Have you ever heard of prohibition in the U.S.? How successful was that? Right? It's the same lesson. People wanted to drink alcohol, beer, wine, spirits, but the government stepped in and said, no, you can't supply this stuff. Wasn't there a dude like by the name of Al Capone and others of his like ilk that became quite violent and had many shootouts with the coppers?
And became very wealthy in the meantime.
Absolutely. He cartelized the whole thing, and that's how you get wealthy, because it all went underground. Because ultimately the demand is there. That's the same thing here. So we, of course, in the words of Yuri Maltsev and probably other people before, the one lesson of history is it teaches us nothing. We've been through this prohibition before on numerous occasions. I think maybe the best example is what people call prohibition, which was alcohol or prohibition. We've seen that it does not work. So we're trying that again with drugs. And it pushes this whole industry underground. It creates a worse situation in these other countries, and in this case is Central Americas, where what's their incentive to not leave? Ask yourself, would you not leave? Even if there's no carrot in the United States, you have a disincentive to stay where you are. And I think a lot of people around the world know that there is at the very least, a higher standard of living in the States. Why not give that place a shot? Why would, you don't hear too many Central Americans trying to go to Uganda. There's not this massive wave of Central Americans trying to get to Zimbabwe. Why? Because their standard of living isn't real high.
Or Antarctica.
Yeah. There's not a whole lot of commerce. At least I don't know. You can, do Bitcoin with penguins yet, but maybe you will be in short order.
Right.
So if you don't,
an interesting point.
yeah, if you don't look at the underlying cause, the incentives that are in place or the disincentives in place, then you can't learn anything. And if you don't, you can't learn anything if you, as you say, don't have respectful discourse. You know, if I just yell at you and scream at you and tell you you're an idiot, a moron, what's the slogan? It's the stupidity, stupid. Right?
Well,
it doesn't work.
Equally as bad, in my opinion, is that you shut up and don't listen at all.
Well, you probably just alluded to a big chunk of the American citizenry.
Right.
Well, most people don't know. They don't care.
Everybody wants to know whose team you're on.
Yeah,
are you on my team or you're on the other team?
You a donkey or an elephant? I got to know. Blue, red.
Right. Oh, you're one of those.
Yeah, you're going to the slaughterhouse anyway, by the way. It says so on the sign. So anyway, I think that's very interesting, and I know a lot of people would discount these types of articles. And again, I'm not saying the president of Honduras is an angel. Just because I'm against public education because it violates people's property rights in order to create that program doesn't mean I'm not for education. Okay? I think I've kind of gotten over that. But that's actually an interesting article. We'll put that again on Facebook and have people check it out. I think it's worth reading. The other one that I'm a little off track here, and I got to get to the... This is... let me get... I think it's right here on the Facebook page. I'm scrolling down. I'm stalling here. Okay. Do you have the Facebook page up, Brad? You'll get a kick out of this one. Get down 2-3 pages worth. There's a meme. It's an American Indian. Am I supposed to say Native American now? I don't know what the right thing is. And I think it drives home a good point, and I'm sure some people will be offended. But again, the point is the point. So he's in traditional, I'll call it American Indian garb with the feather. And the saying is... Again, we're talking about the migrant surge and the whole immigration thing. The word says, you say a bunch of immigrants are refusing to assimilate to your culture and are threatening your way of life? Man, that sucks. I mean, we talked about this at the shop today. Think about this. And I know a lot of people just laugh at this. But, you know, theoretically, from my minimal understanding of history... The American Indians were here. The Europeans came in. As far as I know, I'm not living in a teepee. I don't see many teepees around. I don't see us chasing around buffalo on the high plains. I don't speak Cherokee. I can't think of all the languages they had.
Lakota, whichever, right?
So did the Europeans assimilate? No. Apparently, that wasn't a problem for the Europeans, the white man, the majority at the time. But all of a sudden, when there's people at the border now that are of a different color, a different culture, speak a different language, it's a problem. They got to assimilate. They have to assimilate.
Are you saying that there's hypocrisy in this world, Tom?
There might be a touch of it. By the way, usually the same guy who is saying, no, they have to assimilate, in my experience, he's a liberal Democrat who's saying he's all for individualism. But you better assimilate. I'm like, hello, can you hear what you're saying? I mean, it's just endless. Anyway, I just thought that was a great message, and it was relevant to the whole immigration thing.
Very telling.
Before we move on to Hans Herber Hoppes, I got to say, well, everybody, you're listening to the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. We appreciate you joining us. And we're going to get to our Bill O'Reilly Impact segment. Or we kind of already did that, right? It's just fun to say that. Sorry. Okay. The consummate broadcast professional that I am, I just couldn't resist. What was the other? I was looking at a whole bunch of stuff for our T-shirt, upcoming new T-shirt. One of them was, I'm already against the next war. I like that one. There was an article here, just another one kind of to back this whole thing up and add to this. What's it entitled here? Endless wave of illegal immigrants floods Rio Grande Valley. This was from Fox News, or what do they call it? Fixed News. Have you not seen that one, Brad? People
I have not seen the Fixed News one.
Fixed News. That's what they call it now. That's what the cool people call it. So that's why I had to use that word.
I like it.
I'm trying to assimilate here, man. Cut me a break. Okay, so I'm gonna just. It's an exclusive, by the way. It says it's from McAllen, Texas. To be honest, I don't know exactly where that is. I assume it's down the Rio Grande Valley. Life jackets of all sizes and the occasional punctured raft are strewn along the banks of the Rio Grande, just south of Mission, Texas, where a relentless onslaught of illegal immigrants eagerly surrender to beleaguered Border Patrol agents around the clock. Illegal immigrants eagerly surrender. Okay, if that's true, I'm assuming they're here for the welfare state. If you were coming here across the border to get a job, why would you surrender to a border agent? It's like, I'm not going over to that dude with a badge. I'm going to get me a job. Anyway, it's a cycle for which there is no end in sight. You're going to be out here for a long time, Fernando, an El Salvadoran child, told FoxNews.com shortly after surrendering to Border Patrol authorities after midnight Saturday. There are thousands of us. Of course, they're trying to make this more of a big deal. And let me backtrack and apologize. It is a big deal to anyone who's adversely affected by this. Of course it is. But in a national scope, I would argue, and in fact, it can't be a big deal if we're not looking at the root cause. Right? It's like having a little crisis at your place of work, and everybody's talking about, okay, we'll put a Band-Aid on it. This is a really big deal. We'll put a Band-Aid on it. I got a feeling if they were at the hospital and, they're suffering from something serious and the doctor says, we'll put a Band-Aid on it, they'd object to that. But all of a sudden when, it's me being the doctor, I'll say, all right, we'll just put a Band-Aid on it. So my point is, can't be serious if you're talking about Band-Aids. Where is he said? He says, with most of the men and women charged with securing the Mexican border busy processing some 60,000 illegal immigrants who have made the harrowing and sometimes deadly journey to the American border in the past 9 months, only a handful of Border Patrol agents drive the Riverside Loop in a small town called, I think it's Granino, just south of Mission in the Rincon Peninsula. I read some stories somewhere too. I'm really good at not citing stories. It's something like crazy, like 60% of a Border Patrol agent's time is on paperwork and actually not in the field anyway. So I just cite this, and there's all kinds of details in this. I can put this up on the Facebook as well for anyone who has any interest. I'm just trying to supply some more background to this story of what's going on. I'm going to assume at this point people are kind of semi-well aware that there's this crisis at the border of a migrant surge. So that brings us to Hans Hermann Hoppe's article, and I know you did your homework, didn't you, Brad?
I believe I did, Tom. Yes, I did.
Sweet. Book report. Fish it out. No, I'm just kidding.
It's a very. I'm going to go a different direction here for a second.
Okay.
I guess maybe we should get into the article, but what I find to be interesting, and I'm sorry if I'm taking this the wrong direction, but liberty is a very independent, live and let live philosophy. Independence, all of that. Correct?
Anything peaceful.
And peaceful.
Anything peaceful.
But my take on this article dances around and gives a lot of, and we're going to talk about it, but it gives a lot of insight as to why you would want immigration, why you wouldn't want immigration. But a live and let live principle would seem to favor all y'all income free, come on in. You're an individual, we're individuals. I respect you, you respect me.
Yes, and I'm going to shed some light on where I was when I first really got heavily into this. Wait a minute. News flash. Trigger just texted me. He says, "Did your show start yet?" I just have to let him know. Yes. All right. There we go. Okay. When I, first, I guess could just self-describe as a libertarian, I was, of course, for open borders. Because I'm right with you. I understand what you're saying, and that seems to make the most sense.
Well, I'm not sure that it makes sense for our country, especially after I listened to some of the very interesting examples in history that immigration has. We're talking about history again, but reasons why you would, why you wouldn't want immigration. But taking that aside, we're talking about a self-proclaimed you own you, and so I don't see where I should have, or we should have collectively. I guess that's where the rub seems to be. That says no, you can't come here.
Okay. So I was an open border guy. I think you're an open border guy if you're a libertarian by default. Just like we talked about many times, intellectual property rights. Thinking, yeah, of course, there's got to be patents because you got to, it's your idea. You should protect it.
Right.
So I think that's where you are. Most people are on open borders. When I say most people, I'll call them infant libertarians, early libertarians. Until I read, I don't even remember the title of the article, but something from Hans Hermann Hoppe. Think about this for a second. If this was a private law society, in other words, there's no state.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Everything is now privately owned. It's not possible to have something publicly owned. Oh, wait. You could have things jointly owned, right? Everyone in our subdivision, when we buy a house, we get 168th of the park, right? So 168 of the homeowners in the subdivision own the equivalent share of that park. The park is still privately held, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no such thing as public. So my point is, all property in what is now called the United States is privately held. So you can't just come on my property without an invitation, right?
Okay.
So now I'm coming from El Salvador. Where do I go? Let's just assume for a moment, Mexico still exists, and that border with Mexico, which is largely the Rio Grande River, still exists. We still recognize that as the border. The stuff on the other side we call Mexico. The stuff on this side we call free country.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Well, as soon as you step across from the south, going north of the Rio Grande, you're on private property. You're trespassing. If you're in fact trespassing, you're uninvited. So where could you go? In other words, essentially, if you have a private society, a private law society, I should say, a free society, you can only come by invitation. Think about your house. If you and I didn't talk and I just was in a neighborhood and I came by your house, you would have the option to say, hey, Tom, I didn't invite you here. What are you doing on my property?
That's what I do normally.
Yeah, I didn't want to say that on the air, but okay. That's kind of friends that we are.
Yeah.
But the point is, you would be within your rights to do so. Even if you invite me on the property, later you say, Tom, you said something I find offensive, so I don't want you to be around. Or Tom, I don't like the color of your hair, the way you combed it last night, so could you please leave my property? Right? I'm only invited as long as I'm invited. I can become uninvited at any time.
Okay.
So the same would apply to, for the moment, we'll call him a foreigner coming in, an immigrant, if you were. They can't even fly in. The airport is privately owned, I assume by some private corporation. It would be in a free society. Well, you can't come there unless you're invited. Now, they might allow them because they say, hey, we got to deal with all the airline carriers who use this facility, and any passenger is okay to come here, right? That could work, but the point is, where are they going to go now? They're at the airport. You can't get on the road. The road's privately held, unless, of course, the owner of the road says, sure, we'll let anybody who wants to drive on the road drive on the road. We don't care. Right? I assume in a private law society, they're going to say, sure, you can drive on my road as long as you help pay for the road. Mm-hmm. So you better have cash. Okay, and if assuming for a moment you have cash, okay, so you get on the road. I don't know, you walk down the road, you got enough cash, you take a cab, you rent a car. I don't know what okay, so you do. But again, where are you going to go? You can hang out at a store, maybe. They don't. I assume people in a free society they're going to check IDs at the door. They want everybody to come in. Potentially, you could buy stuff from the store, right? But the point is, you've got no place to go that you. One could take advantage of some social safety net, unless someone just provides charity to you, and they invite you into their mission or place that gives out beds for free for people or whatever. The point is, it's limited. You have to be invited in a free society to go anywhere. So it'd be very difficult for these people even to do it. And the point is, you're doing it without force, right? There's the property owner on the Rio Grande could put up a fence if he wanted to. It depends on what he wants to tolerate, right? If there's a constant line of people crossing my property and I don't want them to, well, then I put up a fence. I post a sign saying, hey, you're trespassing and you'll be shot if you are on my property. The point is, all these things could be done without the use of aggressive force. Right? You can, if you want to, only if you can retard these, I'll call it invasion, which it's not, by defensive force, not by use of aggressive force. Right? You don't have to have a border patrol agent there that potentially shooting at people. And say, well, wait a minute, didn't you say a guy who owns property could potentially shoot a trespasser? Yes, that's entirely different, actually. And then you're going to say, no, it's not. The trespasser, he still gets shot. The bullet is different. But the point is, if you're the owner of the property, you can defend the property. It's defensive force then. If you're a border agent, you don't own the property. Then you shouldn't be shooting a trespasser. You don't have legitimate authority, which I know in this world now they say they do have legitimate authority. It's not legitimate.
Okay.
Okay, so the point is, just because you're a libertarian, if you're an anarcho-capitalist, if you are a supporter of a free society, I think to be consistent and have a coherent argument, you're not for free and open borders. Anybody just come. Walk across anybody's private property you want. Come up to Wisconsin.
Okay.
Right? If I had that position, I'm inviting people to invade other people's property.
Okay.
Right? That's an inconsistent position. So my position has to be, no, you have to respect other people's property rights. And if you're not invited, you're not respecting their property rights. Okay, so I think...
So how am I going to move around? And we're way off in a ditch here. How am I going to move around in a free society?
Well, I just explained, like in a store. I'm assuming
if I am part of this freedom state.
Right, but just as I explained, I assume every store is going to want you in. Although every store could tell you, we want no people to come in here. I got a feeling they're going to be out of business in pretty short order, but I'm no economist.
Okay.
Right? There's many places that want you to come in. Just like right now, the only places that you would have any question with is probably residential places and some places of business that aren't open to customers, like a manufacturing facility. I'm saying go on that manufacturing facility right now. Just walk in there and walk into Ford's Dearborn, Michigan plant. Walk in there. First of all, you're probably never going to get that far. But let's just say you do. And the guy's putting nuts on the car. Says, dude, what are you doing here? My name's Brad. I'm just here. I got a feeling you're going to be out of there in short order. Mm-hmm. If you, again, even get that far. Why? Because you're not invited to be on that private property. It's no different in a free society.
Fine. Okay.
Right? You say, well, no, it's different. Traveling down the road, I probably won't be able to travel down the road. I'm going to tell you, every guy who owns a road is going to want as many people on that road as possible because he wants to make money. He's going to be out of business if he says nobody can be on my road. Right? He's going to lose his money. He's going to go into foreclosure, and he's going to have to give up that road to the next guy. And, maybe 10 businessmen in a row figure out they do the same thing, and they all go bankrupt, and they go, maybe we ought to open the road and let cars pass, and we'll charge them a fee. Right? So it's people have a hard time envisioning how a free society works, although in a lot of these ways, we operate the same way right now.
Well, I think a point in the article makes that how we collectively, how the state collectively chooses to distribute funds for roads that benefit just a very, 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 very small number of people.
Yes, the nature of the state.
So in the instance that you just said, that road is privately owned, then nobody's driving on it. Nobody can make any money from it. Maybe we don't need that road.
There you go. That's one, right? Because obviously the guy goes out of business.
Right.
And by maybe the 9th businessman says, the 10th guy says, I'm not buying it. It doesn't work. I mean, right. The 9th guy opened it up and nobody drove on it. He went bankrupt too. Okay. The nature of the state is to socialize costs and privatize or, what's the word, funnel the benefit to a few.
And by the way, we talked at length about a very interesting example on last week's show about the Alaskan Highway and how it is basically a private road.
Yes.
And it functions extremely well, potentially better than some of our current public practices.
Yes, according to the article that we cited.
Yes.
I've never been on the road. I can't tell you from firsthand experience.
Me neither. Okay, so let's talk about this article, Tom.
Okay. I just want to read part of it because I don't want him to be, Dr. Hoppe to be misquoted. This is, I guess, section 2 of this article. He says, as it is stated, the above argument in favor of free immigration is irrefutable and correct. It would be foolish to attack it, just as it would be foolish to deny that free trade leads to higher living standards than does protectionism. And I know a lot of people are, I would say, undereducated when it comes to economics, and they may believe to the contrary. I would argue your thinking is flawed. He says it would be wrong-headed to attack the above case for free immigration by pointing out that because of the existence of a welfare state, immigration has become to a significant extent the immigration of welfare bums, who even if the United States, for instance, is below her optimal population point, do not increase but rather decrease average living standards. For this is not an argument against immigration, but against the welfare state. That was, again, the question I asked back in the chat room earlier. We had that discussion. To be sure, the welfare state should be destroyed, root and branch. However, in any case, the problems of immigration and welfare are analytically distinct problems, and they must be treated accordingly. So he says they're different problems, but it doesn't mean that they're not interrelated, right? Because one creates a carrot for more migrant people to come to the United States. He says the problem with the above argument is that it suffers from two interrelated shortcomings which invalidate its unconditional pro-immigration conclusion, and or which render the argument applicable only to a highly unrealistic, long bygone situation in human history. The first shortcoming will only be touched upon. To libertarians of the Austrian school, it should be clear that what constitutes wealth and well-being is subjective. Material wealth is not the only thing that counts. Thus, even if real incomes rise due to immigration, it does not follow that immigration must be considered good, for one might prefer lower living standards and a greater distance to other people over higher living standards and a smaller distance to others. This is in Human Action, I think it's maybe the best place to cite. Murray Rothbard talks about this too. I can't tell you which book exactly. I should be able to tell you that. You basically totem pole things that you want, your wants, and that totem pole moves. But let's say I don't agree with your totem pole. You know, like you prefer a hot dog over a sandwich. when in fact say I would prefer a sandwich over a hot dog. That doesn't mean that your totem pole is incorrect. By definition, your totem pole of preferences is correct because it's your totem pole. You're the only one who can have that. So he's saying, although probably most people prefer a higher standard of living, we can't conclusively say that all people prefer higher standards of living. Maybe what I consider my standard of living is being far away from Chinese people. Right? And I'd be willing to take less money or live less luxuriously to be further away from a Chinese guy. And you might say, no, you're wrong, dude, because you have a lower standard of living. Well, that's the whole point. I get to evaluate my standard of living, and I say, hey, no, I actually have a higher standard of living because I'm further away from the Chinese guy.
And conversely, I might want to pay more to be near a goat farm because I just think goats are the greatest thing ever.
Exactly. And I might go, geez, Brad, you're going to have to put up with that smell and the goats and whatever sound they make, right? You're crazy. You have a lower standard of living. Again, it's subjective is the point. You decide for yourself what that is. So he's saying just because the material, maybe standard of living goes down, doesn't actually mean your standard of living is lower. It depends what your preferences are. Mm-hmm. Okay. So what he's doing is refuting this proposition that we had before. He says, instead, a second related shortcoming will be the focus here. With regard to a given territory into which people immigrate, it is left unanalyzed who, if anyone, owns or controls, that's what ownership is about, this territory. In fact, in order to render the above argument applicable, it is implicitly assumed that the territory in question is unowned and that the immigrants enter virgin territory or open frontier. Obviously, this can no longer be assumed. If this assumption is dropped, however, the problem of immigration takes on an entirely new meaning and requires fundamental rethinking. Again, this is the whole point. If everything's privately owned, where are you going to go if you're uninvited?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's really what he's driving to. For the purpose of illustration, let us first assume an anarcho-capitalist society. See, I like that assumption already. See, can you see how I'm on board with this guy?
You're a happy guy.
Yeah. Though convinced that such a society is the only social order that can be defended as just, I do not want to explain here why this is the case. Instead, I will employ it as a conceptual benchmark because this will help clear up the fundamental misconception of most contemporary free immigration advocates. All land is privately owned, including all streets, rivers, airports, harbors, etc. With respect to some pieces of land, the property title may be unrestricted. That is, the owner is permitted to do with his property whatever he pleases, as long as he does not physically damage the property owned by others. And as long as you don't aggress against the next guy, you can do whatever you want on your property.
Okay.
With respect to other territories, the property title may be more or less severely restricted. As is currently the case in some housing developments, the owner may be bound by contractual limitations on what he can do with his property. Voluntary zoning. What's the better description of that? When you have we lived in a number of these things. You know,
a covenant or something?
Yeah, covenant. What the heck do you call it? It'll come to me in here.
Association?
Association, that's the word that's commonly used, right?
Yep.
So when I come into an association, they have certain rules. Well, by coming in there, now I've either agreed to it and I come in, or I falsely represent agreement. I come in and I don't agree to it, right? Therefore, trouble's going to ensue one way or the other. Or I don't agree to it explicitly, so I don't buy there. Those are my choices, right?
Yep.
So if you're living there and you agreed to the terms, you're bound by the terms of an association. So that's what he calls voluntary zoning.
Okay.
Which might include residential versus commercial use, no buildings more than 4 stories high, no sale or rent to Jews, Germans, Catholics, homosexuals, Haitians, families without children, or smokers, for example. And that's where a lot of people they're in the ditch right now.
Boy, that is not PC, Tom. You back off, man.
And that's maybe we got to have a whole show on that topic. But
obviously, I'm being facetious, but this was another concept that was hard for me because our state dictates morality now, and morality also is it dictates not only morality but also what you should and shouldn't like, do, treat, etc.
Yeah, it essentially is forced integration. I know for a fact that you have a certain bias against 52-year-old German males of German descent. So, right, but that's the whole point. Good for you, right?
Yep.
You have a place that you want to rent above your garage, and you just say, Tom, here's the deal. I don't rent to 50-year-old males of German descent. Oh,
Yep.
shucks. And people say, well, that shouldn't be the case. Brad should be forced to rent to me.
Correct.
And my first question would be, why? Why should you be forced to rent to somebody you don't want to rent to? And the second thing is, on my part, I don't think I'd want to rent a place from you. If I know essentially the only reason I was there is because you have to rent it to me. In other words, you hate my guts. I already know that. How do you think our relationship's going to be going forward?
But humorously, that happens every single day, thousands of times.
Absolutely. And Hoppe would go on, and again, I won't cite the right book, but he will go on and say, and that's a cause of a lot of problems. Mm-hmm. Right? Now I'm having that interaction with that Chinaman that I was trying to avoid by accepting a lower material standard of living and being further away from him. Now you force me to be with him. What do you think's going to happen?
So there's a lot of people listening that are going, holy cow, these guys are whacked out racists.
Yeah, and I think the word racist has been co-opted, but that's a whole nother...
Okay, well,
the whole point is...
Prejudice.
Prejudice. Yeah, and really, you know what? Why should it be illegal to be prejudiced? And in fact, I guess it's actually not illegal now to be prejudiced, right?
And we're not advocating that a person be prejudiced, but a person would be entitled to be whatever they want to be.
We're advocating the protection of private property rights. Right. It's your garage studio apartment that you want to rent. You rent it to whomever you choose to rent it to for whatever rate you choose to rent it for, under any terms that you want. Now you say, well, wait a minute, I could choose the terms, but I can't get a renter at those terms. Well, now you either have to make a decision. Don't rent it or change your terms. Mm-hmm. Simple as that.
Right.
Okay, back to the story. So basically, we're just at the point where he's saying, you can have covenants in these associations for all kinds of crazy things. What's typical now is, no buildings over 4 stories, no crazy paint colors on the exterior homes and stuff like that. But of course, Hoppe has to go a little further than that. Just he's got to get people's dander up a bit. I think he's great at that. Clearly, under this scenario, there exists no such thing as freedom of immigration. Rather, there exists the freedom of many independent private property owners to admit or exclude others from their own property in accordance with their own unrestricted or restricted property titles. Admission to some territories might be easy, while to others it might be nearly impossible, which I would argue is the case today. Again, the example of trying to get into the Dearborn, Michigan Ford plant. Good luck with that. But on the other hand, I think it's pretty easy to get to Macy's in Chicago. Mm-hmm. I got a feeling there ain't going to be a guy standing there with a gun saying you can't come in, especially if you go, hey, wait a minute, I got cash. I got a feeling you're in. So that's the point. Some places have very free and open access. Other places will have very limited access. Again, which is the same as today is the point. Big deal. I'm going to move on to the next section because I think I've made the point there kind of. In an anarcho-capitalist society, there is no government and accordingly no clear-cut distinction between inlanders, which is domestic citizens, and foreigners. This distinction comes into existence only with the establishment of a government, an institution which possesses a territorial monopoly of aggression, taxation. The territory over which a government's taxing power extends becomes inland, and everyone residing outside of this territory becomes a foreigner. It becomes an us-them deal. You see that border is, the line of demarcation. It's the edges of the jail cell. It's the jailed and the jailers, right? It divides people. Let's see. where was I exactly? Inland everything else becomes a foreigner. State borders and passports are an unnatural, coercive institution. Indeed, their existence and that of a domestic government implies a twofold distortion with respect to people's natural inclination to associate with others. First, inlanders cannot exclude the government, the taxman, from their own property. Right? Think about that. But are subject to what might call forced integration by government agents. Second, in order to be able to intrude on its subjects' private property so as to tax them, a government must invariably take control of existing roads and will employ its tax revenue to produce even more roads to gain even better access to all private property as a potential tax source. Thus, this overproduction of roads does not involve merely an innocent facilitation of interregional trade, a lowering of transaction costs, as starry-eyed economists would have us believe, but it involves forced domestic integration, artificial desegregation of separate localities. That's another big argument when it comes to roads, that people say, well, our roads are subsidized, so if we had been in a free society, and I hate to use that word we, I should be corrected every time I incorrectly use that pronoun. If the United States didn't become the United States as we know it in 1776, if it became a truly free society, we would likely have less roads. Why? Because they wouldn't be subsidized. Like you alluded to earlier, only the roads that would generate sufficient revenue to sustain themselves, or actually to maintain or generate a profit, would exist. And I know now the argument is, well, wait a minute. I might not have a road to my house. Well, I would argue probably not if you owned a fleet of helicopters, because I'm saying you wouldn't have bought the house if there was no way to get there by automobile, if your only mode of transportation was an automobile. Mm-hmm. Right? So the notion that, well, if roads aren't subsidized, I might not get a road to my house is preposterous. Yeah, you might not live in the exact same location if 200 plus years of history were changed. Well, hello, that's no big... A lot of things would be different if 200 years of history were changed. I mean, I might be living in a Jetsons world.
For sure.
Right, so anyway, I'm moving along again, and I'm not doing this article justice, but we got to bring this here to a close in short order. It's now time to enrich the analysis through the introduction of a few realistic empirical assumptions. Let us assume that the government is privately owned, which is a crazy notion. The ruler literally owns the entire country with state borders. He owns part of the territory outright. His property title is unrestricted, and he is partial owner of the rest as landlord or residual claimant of all his U.S. citizen tenants' real estate holdings, albeit restricted by some kind of pre-existing rental contract. Right? It's sort of, he's basically alluding to taxation there, right? You got a way of getting money from him. Right. He can sell and bequeath his property, and he can calculate and realize the monetary value of his capital, his country. You know, he's going to go right here to monarchies, kings, right? They had an incentive to build up the asset value of the country because they were actually the owners of the country, whereas our politicians today are only transient in place. They, in fact, have the reverse incentive. They have the incentive to consume as much wealth instead of accumulating it because they're going to be out of office. What will a king's typical immigration and emigration policy be? Because he owns the entire country's capital value, he will, assuming no more than his self-interest, tend to choose migration policies that preserve or enhance rather than diminish the value of his kingdom. Traditional monarchies and kings are the closest historical examples of this form of government. Okay, so you get it under here. I'm trying to skim down. Migration policies become predictably different once the government is publicly owned. The ruler no longer owns the country's capital value, but only has current use of it. He cannot sell or bequeath his position as ruler. He is merely a temporary caretaker. Moreover, free entry into the position of a caretaker government exists. Anyone can, in principle, become the ruler of the country. That's a result of democracy. I'm trying to move along where he gets, I can't remember, it's been a while now since I read this, where I can get kind of to the conclusion here where he's saying The current situation in the United States and in Western Europe has nothing whatsoever to do with free immigration. It is forced integration. Plain and simple, and forced integration is a predictable outcome of democratic one-man, one-vote rule. Abolishing forced integration requires a de-democratization of society and ultimately the abolition of democracy. More specifically, the authority to admit or to exclude should be stripped from the hands of the central government and reassigned to the states, provinces, cities, towns, villages, residential districts, and ultimately to private property owners and their voluntary associations. In other words, he's saying a so-called foreigner would only come if he were invited, right? You're welcome to come to my property. And by the way, we had a crazy system that was sort of like that in a way. Back in the day, I know in the early 60s, you could only come to the United States legitimately, of course. I guess they called it legitimately. If you had a sponsor, right? You had someone inviting you to your private property. Mm-hmm. That's the way it was. Where was I? One would be well on the way toward a restoration of the freedom and association exclusion that is implied in the idea and institution of private property, and much of the social strife currently caused by forced integration would disappear. He's saying part of the animosity with these people is it's the state, the welfare system that is the carrot for them to come, which of course wouldn't exist in a free society. And secondly, it's the state who decides who gets to stay and who goes. Why can't you, as a private individual, invite somebody and say you could stay here? Right? That authority has been taken away from you. It's the politicians and the bureaucrats who are deciding this. The individual citizens should decide who stays, who goes. Right? And when I say who goes, likely they wouldn't be invited in the first place, so there wouldn't be many goers.
Right.
I think I wanted to get to his last paragraph here. Okay, so more specifically, I of course skipped a number of paragraphs again. More specifically, it means distinguishing strictly between citizens, naturalized immigrants, and resident aliens, and excluding the latter from all welfare entitlements. It means requiring as necessary for resident alien status as well as for citizenship, the personal sponsorship by a resident citizen and his assumption of liability for all property damage caused by the immigrant. That was the purpose of having a sponsor back in the 60s and before. It implies requiring an existing employment contract with a resident citizen, moreover, for both categories, but especially that of a citizenship. It implies that all immigrants must demonstrate through tests not only English language proficiency, but all-around superior, above-average intellectual performance and character structure, as well as a compatible system of values, with the predictable result of a systematic pro-European immigration bias. Right? So it's these same people who are for individualism, I guess. I'm not. The word's escaping me. But they're the ones who want to close off the border at the same time. Well, Papa is saying the border shouldn't be open, but for a different reason. It's because it's private property. You're not invited. Unless, of course, you're invited. Right? And that's what people have trouble over, and they, of course, have trouble over that you can discriminate, you control, so you have discrimination over your property. Full control, full discrimination over your property. And I know that's a controversial subject for many. The problem is, if you don't like that and say, okay, I'll take the whole libertarian thing except for that part, you're saying there's exception to the rule. I'm all for respect for property rights except for this one. I'm all for the non-aggression principle, but in this case, we should aggress against innocent people. And that's why I'm saying at the outset of the show, principles do matter. Otherwise, you have to have an unprincipled position. How do you argue for an unprincipled position? I don't know how people do that.
That is a bunch of stuff to get your head around, Tom.
Yeah, it's probably too much for this show. I probably packed in too many concepts, but I kind of wanted to give the whole argument or a big chunk of the argument. You know, it's always tough in this environment. If you don't give enough, people say, well, you didn't make a full case. If you make a full case or closer to a full case, people say, well, that's too much. right? You got to lose, and I'm just asking that people hang around and get some of this through osmosis, and I think it'll get you on board. I understand some of it sounds crazy, sounds radical, but it's principled versus unprincipled. That's the point. All right, so you have any recap, anything you want to add before we close this out, Brad?
I do not. We're right up against the wire here. I again encourage people to keep giving us a listen, give us your feedback, let us know your thoughts, and please just think for yourself.
Yes, do so. We are going to leave you with this song from John. Oh, I think it's Adler, and it's entitled "River Jordan." And we have his permission to play this on the air. I think it's kind of a cool Johnny Cash-like song. That's just my impression. I maybe shouldn't have said that. I didn't want to get that in anyone's head. But you've been listening to the Annoying Peasant Radio Show. We appreciate you listening, and we look forward to being with you next week. So with that, we will go. And here we are, River Jordan.
Thanks for listening.
Good night, everybody.
Gonna take down Jordan where the girl runs clean. The river runs dirty, some things never clean. There's a man in camel skin on a bank outside of town. He baptized some while others sink drown. God bless some more than others I hear. But I ain't never seen them. Long gray beard. Some comrades call suicide. Some think it right when it was a trip tide. God bless souls every day they stay alive. Some think it's holy in this name they die. Boys, let me tell you that when cousins start fighting, an eye for an eye gets second fight. Brother John's out there, running out of town. Can't you hear him screaming? The warriors are around. He cries out across the ages in the same voice. Long standing sentinel with a solitary choice. Fly, still source that we all hold dear. But I hate never blood. Make a river run clear. Gonna take it down where the current runs lean. The river runs dirty, some things never clean. There's a man in a camel skin on the bank outside of town. He baptized some while others drown. God bless the whole others I hear. But I ain't never seen no in his long gray beard. I said, God bless some old others I hear. But I ain't never seen no in his long gray beard.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Annoying Peasant Radio Show.